Thank you so much. The epidemic of gun violence is perhaps the most urgent issue for young Americans. Recently, I had the chance to meet with Assemblywoman Monique Chandler Waterman, and we were discussing approaches to gun violence prevention, including CVI. She spoke of her fight to get everyday gun violence occurrences in black and brown communities recognized by the federal government and the media when they are mass shootings. Ms. Cooley, can you talk a little bit about the biggest gun violence prevention challenges facing communities of color, black and brown communities, and how Community Justice Action Fund and March for Our Lives are working together to address those issues?
Yes, absolutely. As someone who is young and a person of color, I see what the violence looks like every day because that's the environment I grew up in, right? And so what that everyday gun violence looks like is one shooting happens and then a family 9 times out of 10 will want to retaliate because they lost a member, so they, retaliate. And so that's why violence interrupters are so important, because you have mental health professionals, you have CVI groups who go to the site and talk to them about ways that they can heal from this and not continue the repeated cycle. And so I think something that both Community Justice and March for Our Lives do collaboratively is making sure that we are bringing in young people to the table. We're bringing in the boots on the ground organizers to the table and asking them, how can we support you? What initiatives do we need to fight for? And how can we use our connections to talk to legislators to fight for funding to make sure these CVI groups can continue the amazing work that they're doing?
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned something that I think is really important for people to know, especially when it comes down to gun violence in very densely populated areas. Most of the gun violence actually tends to come from the same groups of people. Easily identifiable, easy to create relationship. Not easy, but we can create the relationships, and it should be easy to get the money flowing in the right direction. Can you explain how community violence intervention initiatives work and what it looks like on the ground?
So as I said earlier, when a violent act occurs, you have the violence interrupters who go there on the site to talk to the community members. Like, I do work in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and there's groups who every day, this is where they've lived all of their life, right? They know these people, they know these streets, they know the targeted groups that tend to have those acts of violence. They speak to them. And then there's also groups that have mental health professional and guidance for afterwards. So when mothers lose their sons, there's groups that will reach out to them, and they have a hotline on the south side of Chicago. So when they need to talk to someone about what they're going through that only a mother could know, those groups are readily available. And so it's groups like that that need funding, that don't often make it to the national news, but yet they dedicate their everyday lives to working to end gun violence. And so those are the groups that really need the funding to continue the work that they're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Timpson, Congress has the ability to support community violence intervention in a big way. The city of Orlando started their CVI program with money from the American Rescue Plan over a year ago. And what we've seen is gun violence in the city of Orlando has gone down because of the work that they've been doing. Something that we've encountered, especially recently as I've spoken with our county, our city, and trying to expand CVI, is it seems like there tends to be a butting of heads in my community of law enforcement and CVI. It looks like law enforcement isn't fully sold on the program itself. There's a lot of skepticism there. I'm curious if you've also met that skepticism from law enforcement within your community, if you've overcome it, how you've been able to overcome it, because for me, I see all these things working in tandem to end gun violence. Obviously, we can't arrest ourselves out of this problem.
Sure, absolutely, we've seen it. Baltimore's had a pretty strong history of some law enforcement issues. And when we first came to Baltimore, I think we went through 4 or 5 commissioners since the time that we started in Baltimore. The key for us was we knew that we couldn't do it without the participation or the buy-in from law enforcement. We think about the community violence intervention ecosystem. When we talk about community, well, law enforcement is a part of the community. What we want is law enforcement to come in and do their jobs in the community in a way that community can appreciate and support. So what we've managed to do was to be able to find partners within law enforcement that we could really form strong relationships with. It was just like no different than when we relentless with our young people. we're relentless with law enforcement. Some would even call it legal stalking, because we don't stop until we can get to the table and really figure out how do we make the community safe. Collaboration with law enforcement is key for a couple of different things. One, it's key for the safety of young people, because if they're in contact with young people every day and they trust us as partners to be able to work with the young people that they come in contact with, a lot of times it prevents that young person from getting involved in the system any further at that point. Two, it's about safety. Safety for staff as well as safety for young people. If we know that an incident is happening in a particular area and we can, law enforcement can tell us, hey, look, it's dangerous in that area right now. You may not need to send your guys out there. Then we can have that real-time communication that really impacts safety. One of the most tragic things about the field over the past couple of years is that we've been suffering a lot of deaths of the workers who've actually been doing the work. So the collaboration between the workforce and law enforcement is becoming more and more critical if we really want to keep safety at the forefront.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. In terms of gun violence deaths, 2023 is on track to be the most deadliest year on record. Yesterday we surpassed 600 mass shootings for the year. Guns are killing far too many people. In the same period, deaths by car accidents have been cut almost in half. Firearm deaths among children have increased by 87%. America has taken action to make cars safer, but has seemingly accepted that gun violence is a part of everyday life. The federal government has effectively regulated cars to improve public safety, but this hasn't extended that to gun violence. In fact, in the 1960s, when there was a struggle to make seatbelts a requirement, the auto industry fought that, just as the gun violence industry is fighting common sense gun reform. Hopefully, in the future, hopefully it's just my kids and not my grandkids, but hopefully my kids will look back at this struggle for universal background checks and see it just as seatbelts, a normal thing in life. Ms. Sampson, how do we overcome the barriers that have prevented us from passing regulations to decrease gun deaths?
And you can answer that, Ms. Sampson, then we're going to move to Ms. Norton. Yep.
Thank you for that question, because I think that there are many things we can do. One of them is what we're doing right here, which is to continue to talk about the problem and talk about it in a multifaceted way, because despite what the gun lobby tries to make people think, gun violence prevention laws are wildly popular with the American people. We see bipartisan support from Republicans, we see it from Democrats, we see it from gun owners and non-gun owners. But what we really need to do is continue to keep the pace up of talking about what it looks like. I think another thing we need to do is talk about democracy and making sure that American voters' policy preferences are actually able to be reflected. And one of the things that we've seen come up over and over again is that things like the filibuster or dark money in elections allow for American voters' preferences to be eclipsed by the gun lobby. So I think that's definitely something that we need to discuss. And then third, I think Mariah talked about it, which is continuing to push and put this at the forefront of electoral politics for voters to be able to make their preferences heard, not treat gun violence like a third rail, but to instead put it at the forefront of everything that we do and talk about. Because I've had an opportunity to talk in different states and talk to different types of Americans, and the idea that gun violence prevention is divisive is wildly overstated. Americans are fed up. I've seen people talk about the fact that they are conservative gun owners, but they are sick and tired of the inaction. So I think we need to just continue to put this on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Ms. Norton, you're now recognized for your 5 minutes of questioning.